Does everyone know what a Pokemon is?
Yes. Yes.
What is a Pokemon?
It's pocket monster.
Alright. This is a Pokemon. They're little creatures. You have these trainers. This is a trainer. You catch them. Gotta catch them all. They fight each other, right? So today we're going to be talking about Pokemons.
Nice.
And we have some models, right? Where's a good place to draw this stuff? We're going to have Pokemon. Oh, all these markers. We're going to have Pokemons and trainers. And let's say this is a pretty rudimentary application, and the Pokemon can only belong to one trainer. And a trainer can have many Pokemon. So what kind of relationship is this? One to many. And how do I draw the connection?
Chicken feet Pokemon.
Chicken feet. Which way? Exactly. Because the trainer can have many Pokemon, a Pokemon belongs to a trainer. And you can think about this in terms of tables in a database or attributes that are going to be on here. So we're going to have a name for trainers. It's an attribute, but also a column in a table. And so this will be a class, or also a table, or also a model. You can refer to it with that vocabulary. And a Pokemon is also going to have a name. It's going to have a type, like water Pokemon, I don't know, all forever, yeah. And then it's going to have an attack. And I might need a little help with this one. I'm not very good at all my Pokemon. So this is going to be what we draw out today in ActiveRecord. Are we clear on the relationship? All right. But first, no. Okay. When you guys get your projects that you have to do, you're going to get like a basic starter app that you can write your code in. It's going to use ActiveRecord. We're going to expect you to use ActiveRecord for your final project that you build in Mod 1, and you're going to get starter code like this. So real quick, we can go over the file structure that you're going to get. So there's something called app. What is app usually responsible for? Ruby classes, exactly, and we call those models. Especially when you have something like a database, you refer to it as models. We're going to have a Pokemon one. Right now it's empty. What does the bin folder usually do?
Executes run file.
Exactly, so it's going to have a run file, and whatever is in this file, it executes, and that's how you're going to run your app. So if you do Ruby bin run, it's going to execute whatever's in that file, and the only thing in mind is puts hi, so that's why it writes that. All right, what about the config folder? What is that for? I don't know if it always has tests in it. I know yours probably won't have tests in it.
Environment.
You have the environment file. So this is where we bundle all of our Ruby gems together, so you can use all of those gems in your environment. Now, with ActiveRecord, you're going to be establishing a connection to the database and using ActiveRecord. And this will be set up for you. You won't have to set this up, but just kind of so you understand the structure. And remember that Ruby syntax with the hash doesn't actually have to have the curly braces. So this establish connection method actually takes something called an options hash, where you can specify what kind of database you're using under the key of adapter. So you'll be using SQLite 3 database. And then the database specifies a file where you're going to store this database. So it's going to create this file for you, or look and see if this file exists so that it can then interact with that file, which is your database. Don't worry about this for now. And then what does require all do? Raphael?
It requires all the files in the app folder.
Exactly. It takes a directory and requires all of the files in it so that we have it available in our environment and we can use everything that's in there. What about the gem file? What is this for? Miles?
For specifying all the dependencies that your code needs.
Exactly. So this is basically a way for you to use code that other people wrote, like libraries. So your project will come with this. You'll be able to use all of these, and if you want to incorporate other gems, you can feel free to put them in here. We gotta run bundle, of course. Bundle. Gotta make sure I did that. Oh, I forgot to bundle, see? And that way you have access to all of your gems. And then we have the rake file, which we opened this can of worms in the last lecture. What does our rake file do again?
Runs try commands.
That is one command it can run. So it actually allows you to write what's called rake tasks, and then you can execute them in your terminal. So the rake task that's written here is called console. So if you call rake console in your terminal, it's going to open a pry. Rake console. Hey, we're in a pry. So that's kind of what the rake is, or where you can find the tasks. We can also write new tasks. Like I can make a task that says hello world, and I can call it hello. And I can make it puts hello world. So actually, if you want to see all the rake tasks that you have available for you, very useful tidbit, you can run rake-T. And I have one called rake console, and now I have one called rake hello, because I've just written a rake task here. So if I type rake hello, what is it going to do?
It's gonna say hello.
It's going to put hello world. So we have that. The cool thing is, since we're going to be using ActiveRecord, you can actually, your environment is going to come with this. You're not going to have to write this out. But it's going to require some of these gems, like ActiveRecord, because they have built-in rake tasks in them, and you can now use them kind of like through inheritance. You're now able to use them in your app. So if I run rake-T again, how many rake tasks should I see? More than two. That's the correct answer. So now I have all these other rake tasks that I can use. Ooh, ah. All right, cool. But the one that we're going to start with is called RakeDB Create Migration. Does anyone have any idea what this does? Raphael.
I guess it has something to do with the database. I guess it might send information to the database.
That is a much clearer answer than what I was expecting. Yes, it does allow you to interact with your database. I also would have been fine with it creates a migration. So, I don't know how much exposure you've had to migrations. Basically, migrations allow you to interact with your database, but not in such a way where you're changing the actual data in the database, but more like you're able to change the structure of the database. Do you guys know about this word called schema? What is a schema? Technical word you should know to do with databases.
Kind of like a template, I guess, of how the data is structured.
Yeah, you can call it a template, you can call it a blueprint. It's basically the structure of your data, not the actual data in it. So like, what are the tables? In our case, what are the tables going to be? Based on that relationship that we wrote, what kind of tables are we going to have in our database?
The trader's gonna have name.
Well, those are columns.
So
Pokemon and trainers are going to be the two tables. Think of tables like an Excel spreadsheet. You might have a table, call it Pokemon, and then you're going to have like columns on your spreadsheet, right? And what are the columns going to be?
Name, version,
Name,
version.
type, and what was the other one we talked about? Attack. So these are going to be the columns. This is going to be a table. And then we're going to have rows, and spoiler alert, the rows are going to be the instances. Right? That's what ORMs do. ActiveRecord is an ORM. It allows you to map tables to classes. It allows you to map columns to attributes, and it allows you to map rows of your data to objects or instances. So it's an easier way in ActiveRecord for you to interact with a database instead of having to use SQL. Pretty convenient, right? And so we're going to start with creating a migration, which is going to allow us to make a schema or change a schema. Tell our program what kind of tables are going to be in this database. Because right now we don't even have a database. So, can anyone tell me what command I need to run?
SQL like 3.
We're done with that. No more. No more SQL.
Oh. Okay.
Yes. Exactly. We're going to run rake db create migration. And it's going to take name. So you have to name your migration something. I know this sounds kind of like hocus pocus and you don't really know what's going on yet, but you'll see in a minute, so you have to trust me here. Our migration is going to be called what we're trying to do to the table, what we're trying to change or create. We're trying to create Pokemons. We're trying to create a table called Pokemons, where we store, oh sorry, that's JavaScript syntax. One day that's going to get me in trouble. So we've created a migration. We called it create Pokemons. Did anyone see what happened in the background when I ran that command? Did anyone see any files or folders appear magically? Pokemon RB was already there.
And the files are like
DB! Yeah, someone was paying attention. DB appeared on its own just from running this command, create migration. DB is a folder. It's not the only thing that appeared. It also created a migrate folder inside of it. And that migrate folder created a migration file inside of it. So it created a file like this. And it has a timestamp here too. And we'll get a little bit into that. But basically when you run the create migration command, it creates a file like this, and it names whatever you called your migration, except we use snake case, it makes it into this class case, right? And it gives you this change method automatically, which is basically for you to now write how you want your data table to change, or how you want your schema in your table or in your database to change. So if we wanted to create a new table, does anyone know the syntax for that? You can Google it. This is a Pokemon. Create table, ActiveRecord. What happened, Google? That's unusual. I'm not a robot. Why are you? Traffic lights? This one. Oh no! I'm a robot. Chimneys, come on. All right, thank you, Google.
wow.
ActiveRecord migrations, creating a table. Oh, look. Yeah, so this kind of tells us how to create a table. So we're going to have to use a method like this. So in our def change, we use the create table method. And the argument that it takes is going to be the table that we're trying to make. So what are we going to call it? Yeah, so it has to be plural, actually. When you write your classes, they have to be uppercase and singular, but when you create your tables, the table itself has to be plural and like lowercase, and that's the convention there. All right, so we're creating a table called Pokemons, and when you use this create table method, you have to use do, and it takes a block that's kind of like a table helper, and it allows you to write what columns, I erased it, but like what columns you want in this Pokemon table. So which columns did we say we were going to have? Exactly. So we use this table helper, and we also have to tell what kind of data type that column is going to house, and then the name of that column. What other column do we want to have in this database? T.string type. And the last one?
Attack. So T.string.
All right. So now we've kind of specified what we want this table to look like. We created this migration. The cool thing is, now we have to put it in our database. We haven't done that yet. Does anyone have any guesses based on the commands we can run? What can put this migration into our database? We don't want to drop our database. That just like nukes our database.
How about seed?
Seed?
Seed. That sounds.
This one, seed? This one is a command that allows you to fill up your database with real data. That's not what we want to do. We want to change the structure. Is this one. It's rake db migrate. So we create the migration file. Now it's like we need to migrate the data. And this kind of keeps you from breaking all of your data. Like if you want to change something about your database, maybe change a column name, but you want to keep all your data, you're able to also like migrate all your data too. So if we run rake db migrate, if you see things like this, these little bars, that means you've been successful and your migration ran successfully. Did anyone see anything else pop up? Yeah, so this thing popped up because based on the environment, remember how it either creates this file if it doesn't exist, or it reads from this file. So this file didn't exist when I ran that migration, so it created this database file for me. And you can't read database files. I think it's because they're encrypted or something. So you can't actually, like this doesn't make sense, but you have to trust that your data is there, and I can actually prove it to you a little bit later toward the end of the lecture how you can find your data on your computer. So we ran this migration file. We got our database file. Anything else that popped up? Schema popped up. So now this generated on its own. Like we didn't make this file. And I want you to remember, because you might mess this up if you don't pay attention, is not to ever write in this file or change anything in it. The only way for you to interact with this file, which represents the schema of your database, is through writing migrations, or also calling db rollback, which can roll back to a previous migration. So right now, we ran this migration. If we create more migrations, more migration files will appear here. And that's where this number, this timestamp, comes into play. It's kind of generated using the date and some other numbers. And every time you create a migration, a new number is generated that's greater than the old number. So when you run your migrations, they run in order. And a cool trick is if you check your schema file, you can check that this version matches the last migration file. So then you know if your schema is in sync or not. Like if I did rake db rollback, it's like I undid that migration. So if you ever screw anything up in your database or you want to go back one, you can always do rake db rollback, and you can do it multiple times. And now this file generated by itself, and the stuff disappeared. But that was silly. We don't want to roll back. We want to migrate. All right. So we created our Pokemon's table. How do we create our trainers table? Did you have a question?
Yeah. What does force and cascade?
I'm not entirely sure, but it's always there, and I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think it kind of prevents your data from like becoming corrupted, or like, for instance, if you delete one thing that's related to a different table, like it's not going to break that table. That's like the instance I've seen it in. Matt, do you know more about the force cascade thing?
It's something really specific to like other dependent objects.
Yeah.
It's a little more relevant once we get into object relations with ActiveRecord, but the short version is you'll never have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But it has a little bit more to do with some of the more complex relationships you can do between databases.
I've only ever dealt with it in a different ORM. I used one called Sequelize when I worked with the JavaScript backend, and I used something like force cascade for when I was deleting something related to something else so that it doesn't also destroy that thing. Or when I do want it to also destroy that thing. Like if a Pokemon belongs to a trainer and I destroy that trainer, I want all of that trainer's Pokemons to go away too, or something like that. Miles?
So, even when you're setting up a new like database or a new table within the database, you want to do it through a migration.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. There's not really any other way to do it. So if we were to create the trainers, how would I do that? How did I create the migration before? And then what do I need to give it? And I name it based on what I'm doing. So I'm like, create trainers. So now my second migration generated. And how do I create that table?
Copy and paste from the other file.
You can, but I want you guys to remember. Iterator over what? We're doing create table. What is the name of the table going to be? Trainers. Then what do I do? It's okay, you guys are new to this. And then what do I do? Nice. And what's the name of that column? Cool. What do we need to do in order to have that other table appear in our schema? Migrate the data. Rake db migrate. So now we've migrated the data and it auto-generated here. So now we have it. So migrations are pretty useful also when there's multiple developers working on the same database. You don't want to all be making changes at the same time and breaking it. So that's another use of it, making sure that when multiple developers are working together, all of the migrations run in order. It's also like a version control too, so you can see how your database evolves over time. Question?
So, these like create Pokemon and create trainer classes are going to be separate from the actual physical like trainer class and Pokemon.
Exactly. So we're actually going to make the models a little bit later. Today we'll only make the Pokemon one. But that does bring me to a good point, because with databases, when you have something associated like that, how a Pokemon belongs to a trainer and a trainer has many Pokemon, a Pokemon should really have a trainer ID on it, right? So that way you can tell which trainer that Pokemon is associated with. So if I want to add a column, because here I don't have trainer ID anywhere. Any guesses how I can add the column?
You go back to the create Pokemon topic.
This one?
Yeah.
and just put it here. T.string Pokemon trainer ID. It actually has to be an integer. That's a very good point. So you can do this, but it's not very good practice. The only way that you would be able to do it, because you see this migration file, it actually already ran, and this has already been created. So really, we should create a new migration. The way that you can do it, though, is if you were to roll back and undo all of this and then redo migrate. But I think it's good practice for us to make the migration ourselves. So let's just take this out. So how do I create a migration again? Create migration. What do we want to name it? We want to name it what we're trying to change. And we're trying to add trainer ID to Pokemons. So we can just name it that. And now we generated our migration. So, any guesses on what I need to put in here? We can Google. How to add column to table, ActiveRecord. Please don't ask me about streetlights again. Rails migration, add a column, change a column. So we actually want to use this one. See, this is pretty good. It gives you an example. So in our def change, we want to add a column. What do you think this argument refers to? We can skip that one for now. What do you think this argument refers to? The name of the column, exactly. So for us, trainer ID, and what about this one? Type, exactly. This one refers to the table that we're trying to add it to. Because these migrations, you can add it to any table. Imagine if you had multiple tables. A migration is not tied to a specific table. So you have to tell it what table you're making the change to.
So that very first one, I can use it.
Exactly. So we want to add our column to Pokemons. What should this one be? Trainer ID. And an integer. Now what do I need to do? Break DB migrate. Exactly. And now it appeared here on its own, right? So ActiveRecord is pretty useful. It's an ORM, it creates all this stuff for you, and you just have to write migration files and it'll make the schema for you. But since it's an ORM, we want to interact with objects or instances. We want to interact with classes. We don't have any classes right now. So what do we need to do? We have a file where we can put a Pokemon class, but there's nothing in here.
Wait, we don't have to set a primary key?
No, you'll see about that later. What happened, Ruby? When you interact with ActiveRecord and create new instances that will be mapped to rows in your database, it'll automatically assign IDs for you, and that'll be like the primary key. So what do we need to create here in this class? A class, not a lass. What do we name our class? Pokemon. So this convention, singular, uppercase, and then name of the tables, lowercase, plural. All right. So our Pokemon, we don't need to put anything in it right now. But let's actually just see if it works. So if we go to rake console, and we do Pokemon.new, it creates a Pokemon instance. That's pretty cool. There's nothing really special on it. And we're not really interacting with ActiveRecord right now. So we actually have to inherit from ActiveRecord. Does anyone remember how to inherit?
Yeah.
How do you inherit?
class name assigned next to Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing active.
So actually, it has to inherit from ActiveRecord base. That's just what it is for when you're writing a model. This is called a model or a class. And your migration files, they inherit from something else. They inherit from ActiveRecord migration. So those are like different classes part of ActiveRecord. So now we're inheriting from ActiveRecord base. If I restart my pry, what do you think will happen if I invoke Pokemon.new?
They're gonna have a name type.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's gonna inherit like methods from ActiveRecord.
Well, it is kind of it's inheriting some behaviors from ActiveRecord. It's inheriting the power to do all of this. So like, we didn't have to manually write all of this behavior, kind of what we were going over in the last lecture, and kind of the stuff that you were learning all week, where you have to like specify every single attribute. Just by inheriting from ActiveRecord base, our program, ActiveRecord, is like, oh, thanks developers, you made a class called Pokemon. I see you're invoking .new. Let me quickly check if there's a table called Pokemons that I'm mapped to. Oh, cool, there is a table called Pokemons. Let me check all of the columns on that table and make you have those attributes in your object and instantiate them to nil. So right away you have this behavior automatically without having to write it. It does like a bunch of other things too. It has a bunch of other methods in there. Like remember having to write self.all? Spoiler alert, you don't have to do that anymore. ActiveRecord automatically gives you all of these things that you had to write manually before. Anyways, so let's actually create a Pokemon. What do we want our name? Pikachu, right? That's the standard one. I want to show you guys something else. So Pikachu is it electric type? And then the attack is thunder? Thunderbolt? I don't know. So I have to show you this because you will mess this up one day in your life and you'll never understand why. So actually, unfortunately, this breaks. And normally this would work. But it's because in ActiveRecord, type is a reserved keyword. So never, ever, ever name a column type in ActiveRecord. But it's okay, we can change it. What do we need to do to change our schema? Freak DB, create migration. Name. So maybe something like change type in Pokemons. So la la la, we made our, no, wrong file, our migration file. So maybe now we can Google changing column name. Change column name, ActiveRecord. How can I rename a database column? Spoiler alert, when you're learning Ruby on Rails, you're also going to be using ActiveRecord. So a lot of the times, the things that come up saying Ruby on Rails, you can actually use for your Mod 1 projects because they'll have to do with ActiveRecord. So there's this thing here. Hey look, this tells me how to rename my column. This is not to be confused with the change underscore column method, which will allow you to change the type of the data in that column. This one will just allow you to rename. So, what table are we renaming our column in? Pokemons. And what was it called before? Type. And what do we want to name it now? Poketype. Cool. I like that. So, we just made a migration. What do we need to do next? Great DB migrate. And after we migrate, it was successful. How do we check that it actually worked? Check our schema. So now it appears as PokeType. That's pretty cool. So let's see if what we were doing before. So let me run right console. Let's see if like creating a Pokemon actually works this time. Oh, what's wrong? Oh, rake. It still thinks it's type. Oh, because I didn't change it to PokeType. So now our attribute is called PokeType instead of type. I can't just use type. And it allows me to create this new Pokemon. And it does it for me with ActiveRecord. The cool thing is about ActiveRecord, you have other methods that you can use. So your .new, you can create stuff. There's other methods too. So Pokemon.all is a method you can use in ActiveRecord. What do you think this will give me? All of the Pokemon? Well, plot twist. Right now it's empty. And that's because we didn't save this Pokemon to the database. So there is still a little bit of disconnect of when you create an object versus when you actually map that object over into the database and save it in the database. So your .new method actually just creates the object for you. Your .save method is actually what saves it into the database for you. So if I run Pokemon.new and save it, Pikachu, and then I do Pikachu.save. This looks different. It returned true. Why do you think it returns true? It was successful. That is part of it. It also returns true because basically the database checked that it was a valid entry, and it was like, okay, you can enter my database. So it was able to enter the database. And you'll learn more about validations and how you can actually stop bad data from entering your database. Especially, users, they type weird things sometimes, not what you would expect. So it's a pretty useful thing to know. So it returns true. So now if we do Pokemon.all, what should we see? We should see Pikachu. So it actually went into our database. A cool trick that you can do. Remember this thing that I told you to ignore? Actually, I'm going to put it into our rake task. And it's actually going to log the SQL for us as we interact with our database. So it's actually, you'll be able to see when things go into your database and what SQL queries are being run. And I encourage you to actually do it this way because then you'll have a better understanding of at what point in time you're actually interacting with your database. So, if I restart this pry, and one thing I do want to note from before is when I used just .new to create the Pokemon, the ID was nil. It was not assigned. It was only when I did .save and it entered the database, that's when it gets assigned a valid ID because now this is a valid entry in my database. Okay, so in rake console, say we want to do this Pokemon.new. I'll save that for later. So right now, not touching my database. Underscore, last thing I returned, .save. Now it does touch my database. And that's where this like logging stuff comes up. That it's actually telling you SQL, insert into Pokemons this stuff. So you can see when you're interacting with your database. There's some other methods too that ActiveRecord comes with. So right now, we have to do .new and .save to first create an object and put in the database. There is one command that you can run that both makes the object for you and puts it into your database. Does anyone know about it? Create, exactly. So if we do Pokemon.create, maybe we'll create a Bulbasaur. What's his PokeType?
Grass.
grass. And what's his attack? People actually know this stuff. So now I'm doing Pokemon.create. Is it going to go into my database right away or not?
Yes.
It is. So you can see that insert into Pokemon's, and it has a valid ID number. It's not just nil. Yeah, so .create both instantiates the object and maps it into your database for you. And Pokemon.all should now have, well, I made Pikachu twice apparently, but it has all of our Pokemon. You can even do things like Pokemon.first to get the first one. You can do things like Pokemon.find and give it an ID, and it'll find that particular row in the database and return it to you. So this will give me the Pokemon with ID 2. So it'll give me Pikachu.
So is that only referring to ID? Like, what if you had something else in there?
Great question. There is a method for that. It's Pokemon.findBy. So say you want to find it by the name, and you want to find Bulbasaur.
So it's kind of like where in SQL.
Exactly. And if we hit enter, it might use where. It does use where in the SQL query. It's like select the Pokemon where name is whatever.
So is there a way to log like vice versa, the other way around, like SQL into like the hashes like that?
Like if you want to still use SQL.
Yeah, let's see.
I've used it before. I think if you do the class name .where, and then you can actually pass like some kind of SQL query if you're still trying to make joins or find a very specific piece of data, you can still use SQL. It's pretty powerful. If you check out the ActiveRecord documentation, you can find all the different methods that it has. Another thing with ActiveRecord is it has a .update method. So actually right now, if I wanted to change something, like if I have Bulbasaur, I'll call him Bulb. This is my Bulbasaur. If I wanted to change his name and set it to Bulb, I'm able to change it. It looks like I changed it, but it actually didn't change in my database. So if I see Pokemon.all, he still has Bulbasaur. So I actually have to run .save on him in order for those changes to come into effect. So now he got updated, but there's a .update method too in ActiveRecord where you can do that in one line, where you're actually able to change some kind of attribute about a row. So for instance, I wanted to change Pikachu's name. I can do .update. What kind of arguments do you think this would take? Name. And remember, mass assignment, you don't see those curly braces, but it's actually taking a hash. This is how you interact with ActiveRecord. So change their name to maybe Pika or something. Uninitialized constant, Pikachu.
Because it's capital.
Did I do something wrong? Oh, because it's not a class, it's an instance. Well, I don't think I actually saved this, so let me just do, let me change some methods. Let me do Pikachu.first.update. So that way it'll update the first Pokemon, which we already know is Pikachu. Why is it upset now? Let's do Pokemon.find ID 1. Alright, there you are. Pokemon.update. Name. That worked. So, yeah, so you can do this kind of stuff. You can still use SQLite if you wanted to interact with it, but I wouldn't recommend it. You can just interact with ActiveRecord this way. And we can also still write class methods or instance methods. That's the other cool thing. So if we wanted to write a method here, let's say we wanted to write a fight method or something, and it returns, I'm fighting you. And you can still do like self.something or any kind of attribute that this has. And you can invoke this method regularly and interact with it. So like this Pikachu will have that method. Let's do Pokemon.find. Yeah, so you can like still use methods like that. So that's almost all I have. If you're not convinced that your data is saved somewhere in a database, I recommend that you download SQLite browser. This is a GUI. Anyone know what a GUI is? Yeah. So it basically allows you to like visually see that you have data in your database. So if I wanted to open a database that I have in my computer, let's see. We got our lectures. This one. See, it knows. It knows there's Pokemon in here. It knows that they have ID, name, Poketype, and attack, and trainer ID. It knows about trainers. And you can play around with this tool and actually see the data in it.
How does it know that? I don't know if someone asked this already, but how does it know if it's the primary key for ID? Is that what that little thing there, the yellow marker?
So ID will always be primary key. If it's like a key from a different table, it's going to be that table underscore ID.
Okay.
But this is not something you write. ActiveRecord makes it have a column called ID.
Right. It automatically makes
Is
it.
it also a keyword?
I don't think you can make one called ID because you might be either overwriting it or ActiveRecord will overwrite whatever you put there with an actual ID number. All right, that's all I have for ActiveRecord. I hope it wasn't as confusing considering that you haven't interacted with it too much.
Just a quick announcement on all this. We're going to do a part 2 of this lecture tomorrow morning,
Mm-hmm.
followed by